Hi everybody and welcome to today's MediaWorks Masterclass, which is focused on all things LinkedIn. We're going to be doing a LinkedIn takeover where we're going to be looking at LinkedIn's top tips for 2025. So today I'll be hosting the session. As many of you met me before, I'm David Norris, Group Operations Director here at MediaWorks. So I look after all the elements of performance across MediaWorks. But today it's not really about me, it's to do with the guests that we've got. So we've got Rachel joining us from LinkedIn.
Hi.
Yeah. And we've got James joining us as our paid media director. Would you like to quickly introduce yourself, Rachel?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Rachel. I'm from LinkedIn. I am an agency development lead at LinkedIn and have been at LinkedIn for about 8.5 years in a number of different roles. Hopefully I have got some useful information to provide you with today.
And James?
Yeah, and then I'm James. So I'm paid media director here at MediaWorks. So ultimately, I'm responsible for all the paid channels, of which LinkedIn is one of the larger ones that we sort of work on, and have a lot of client experience across both the B2B and sort of B2C sectors. But LinkedIn tends to be dominated, and I'm sure we'll get onto by some B2B activity.
Yeah, I think it's an important point you raised there, James, because I think when we're putting this session together, I'm sure lots of people are joining us from B2B markets or B2B industries, but we will be touching on B2C as we go through today's session. Just to get it out of the way before we start is, if people do want to talk to us and learn more about LinkedIn following today's session, we are going to be running individual consultations where people can get some time with yourself, James, or other members of the team to ask any individual questions that they've got. We've no doubt got a lot of people joining us today, so we're not going to get through all of the questions even in the Q&A bit. But if people would like to talk any aspect of LinkedIn following today's session, then again, what we'll do is we'll share a link with people as a part of a follow-up. So I guess, Rachel, the first place to start really is the rise of LinkedIn. I think we know that LinkedIn's massively grown as a platform. As James rightly alluded to, we've grown from a B2B perspective, primarily with people thinking of it as very much a B2B led platform. But we are seeing a massive increase in growth of LinkedIn over recent times.
Yeah, so I think that historically, LinkedIn, if we're going back now, maybe 10 years, LinkedIn was always thought of as predominantly being a bit of a jobs board. But we, this year, reached our 1 billion member milestone. And one of the ways in which we have seen exponential growth across LinkedIn in the last, I would probably say 8 or 9 years, is around how people engage with and consume content on the platform and the variety of ways in which they're doing that in their professional capacity, but also as individuals as well.
Yeah, and I think some of the statistics that we'll obviously be sharing are insane, actually. When you think of 1 billion people, it's a massive amount of growth. And I think it's that, we'll talk about this later, but it is that community-led feel. It is about the targeting capabilities. It is about that really targeted approach that you can take on LinkedIn that I do think as well has spurred the interest from advertisers.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes back to it being first-party data as well. So all of the information that you're able to leverage from a targeting perspective is information that people have put on their profiles, right?
Yeah.
For the large part.
Yeah.
So there's trust in what hopefully you're going to be doing from a targeting perspective in that being accurate.
Yeah, it's almost that social proofing without being social proof to allow you on the platform.
Yeah. And because it's the professional network, it is, you get access to data that you just don't get on other social platforms.
Yeah.
And I think that is why, lots of you who might have advertised in the past, it is slightly more expensive as a channel. But that is getting less and less. But the reason you're buying that is because it's quality. You're getting your audience. That person, everyone keeps their LinkedIn profile up to date. Not everyone keeps their Facebook profile up to date.
Yeah, I definitely don't. No. I can't even remember the last time I logged in. But yeah, I agree. On LinkedIn, it is that sort of professional network, James. And I think that creates a massive amount of interest.
And I think also, just before we move on to the next bit, is a large part of it is trust as well. When I think it's Edelman run their trust barometer research, LinkedIn generally always comes out as being the most trusted social platform. And I think that comes down to a lot of how we manage what content is and isn't on the platform, and how gated we can be has improved that trust that people have in us.
Well, there's always that debate, isn't it, about people sharing professionally versus sharing personally on LinkedIn, and you always see
finding
that
the balance.
Yeah, you always see that, don't you, though, in terms of things like the comments that come through, etc. When people do share, there's a real split, isn't there, between people who quite like to see the more personal posts versus people who want to see only professional things. And I think we'll talk about it later in terms of the type of content, where it comes from, where it sits, the different variety that you can see in there, which is really interesting. So I think what we identified when we were preparing for this session is sort of top 5 trends from our perspective. So we talked about broadly at the top, generating demand through LinkedIn. So not just being there in the moment of consumption, if you like, or the moment of engagement. How do you actually generate that demand from the outset? Enhanced analytics, advanced targeting, creative and content, so how they sit together. And then finally, it wouldn't be a masterclass or podcast or webinar in 2024 without mentioning AI in some way, shape or form. So I feel like we're obviously going to talk about where AI sits, how it fits together, and what it means across LinkedIn as we move forward. So I guess first question would be, how do you go about sort of generating that demand through LinkedIn, and what are some of the best approaches that you can take?
So I think from my perspective, in the period of time that I've been at LinkedIn for, lots of, and I think this is across the board, predominantly from a B2B perspective, companies think of marketing in a very short period, like a short cycle frame of mind and perspective, and want to create demand here and now, and sometimes neglect the importance of building up really, really strong brand reputation and perception. And through this is research on screen at the moment from the IPA, but we've also run our own internal research models and studies to look at the effectiveness of running both brand and demand together, and how actually over the long term that is more likely to drive sustainable ROI and success for companies. I don't know if that's what you see as well, but we're trying to shift perception away from the short-term activation approach.
I think what we see is, because I think LinkedIn, the ease of use in which you can, for example, advertise on the platform or engage with people, it typically lends itself to sort of that more, the perception that it can be quite transactional. So at the point of transaction, what can happen? But again, what we see over a period of time is actually to focus purely on the transaction, you're missing out like a heck of a lot. And I know we've got some statistics, data, etc., as we'll go through like this session, James. But, you know, I think what we've seen is that there's people in market at any given time, there's people out of market who may be future customers. And the reality is, if you're not there, if you're not in their consciousness at any given point, the reality of you actually then becoming in their consciousness at the moment of purchase or engagement or lead gen is very, very limited.
Yeah, it's exactly that. I think the challenge with brand and brand versus demand, or not focusing on that, is it is a very short-sighted way of looking at it, as you said, but you're only ever capturing a small part of your potential audience. The audience size and the algorithms are only ever set up to do that as well. If it's a conversion optimized campaign, a lead optimized campaign, you're never going to reach that 100% reach audience penetration that you would get if you were targeting a reach campaign. So really, there isn't. It's about broadening your scope so that you can capture more of the audience and influence people earlier in those journeys. I think that's another important part, because everyone consumes so much media in general, but social media is a big part of that. And there's so many different touch points, which I'm sure we'll get onto in some of the later slides, in any buyer journey. It's about, if you're not capitalizing on being recognizable earlier in that funnel, on giving people content and trust and developing that relationship with your brand, before they have that need state, before they have that action driver and that trigger that they need to actually to make something happen and make the decision on a purchase or whatever, you need to build further up that funnel. And really, like I think as we've got on screen, and I'm sure you can touch on, it's 13 pieces of content that are sort of consumed in the average buyer journey, which is a lot of different ways to interact with someone. And I think it's important to really try and make sure that you lose out if you don't cover both if you don't cover both bases.
Yeah. And you want to essentially, I like to think of it as like sowing the seeds, right? Is that if you're there at the beginning, you're creating the mental availability for your brand, then later down the line, when some kind of decision is being made or shortlisting is being made, you're then considered because people already know to associate your brand with their needs and what they're looking for. And I think the really interesting thing that's on this slide for me is that 90% of that purchase process is actually done and completed by the time any vendor is ever actually then contacted. So you have to be there at the early stage of some kind of process, or if not, before the process even begins.
Yeah, and I guess that if you think about, particularly in the B2B world, if you think about sort of the tendering process, if you think about procurement cycles or even just purchasing cycles, the reality is most people are buying on 3, 6, 12 month, 24-month contractual basis. So they're not sat out there thinking, right, who are we going to use for print supplies at any given moment? The reality is there's only so many of those people in the market. But as you've rightly said, if you're not there and you're not in people's consciousness, the reality is, are you ever going to really sort of become part of that process? Because I speak for myself, but I rarely see an ad, and the first thing I do is think, right, I'm going to click on that ad and convert. Reality is I see an ad and I think, right, I'm going to go and find out a bit more, or I see content and I think, oh, I'm interested in that. I might go and look further into that. So I think it's always that really fine balance.
Yeah. I think you're also building trust. Just a last point on that is it's building your reputation with that user. In B2B particularly, it tends not to be small scale deals. You want a brand that you are familiar with, you're aware of, is reputable because you've seen them post, you've seen them in that tender cycle, if we're talking about that. So just having that awareness, that earlier funnel stage activity transfer to sort of soften the impact of your brand, make sure that they know who you are, make sure that they've seen what you're doing, and build that authority and that trust, because people buy from people. They need to know that they are that you are legitimate, and sometimes the one-off conversion ad doesn't manage to get all of that across.
Yeah, and I think, Rich, it's fair to say, isn't it, like things like click-through rates, are massively impacted on if you're just focusing on demand versus if you're actually combining both sort of brand and demand activity. Yeah,
so generally we see higher conversion rates when brand and acquisition activities are combined in I suppose like an always on full funnel approach to how you're executing your marketing strategy. You will see longer term better conversion through that type of approach. Whereas if you're just running acquisition, yes, you might see better conversion there and then, but going back to what we've just been discussing, running the two together will give it to you over a longer period of time.
Yeah, and that becomes a real challenge, doesn't it? Especially if you've already got a finite amount of target customers as well. You can potentially start burning through that quite quickly unless you're actually trying to build out that broader top of funnel activity. Yeah. And I guess sort of what's on screen now really does sort of show that in terms of the short-term effects are limited, but as you sort of elongate that over a period of time, the impact does become significant, and that is where you do need to invest in that more brand-based activity. So I guess what we're saying is don't ignore that demand gen, like right at the beginning. Don't ignore that conversion piece, because it's really important that you're playing in that space. But over time, do be thinking about, well, how does that fit and how does that align with wider brand activities as you go through? Because whether it's 13 pieces of content, increased click-through rate, typically we know that buying journey isn't just a one-off. It is going to take some time to educate, inform, engage with, build trust with your audience. And I think for me, that the final point around this was wanted to align it with understanding what happens at different stages in the funnel, particularly around things like content types, personas, how we move through the funnel. I think is really interesting, because I think what we'll talk about later is there's so much creative and content choice in LinkedIn that you see, so much varied content. And again, what sits where within the funnel, I think, is quite an interesting piece.
Yeah, so I think there's no way that we could probably have this conversation without talking about some form of video.
Yeah.
Video, especially for reach and engagement, enables you to, I think, first off, build trust, but secondly, also educate people. So for more of the middle of the funnel type of content, you can really leverage video to educate people on how you can add value to them as a brand. And for shaping trust and perception of your brand, I mean, across the platform, there's a plethora of different ad formats that you can use. But one thing that I think is really key is testing and learning what works best for you.
Yeah.
I think that's something that we always default to recommending to anyone that we talk to. Is you don't know what is best for you and your brand unless you test and learn. But use carousel ads, see if that is something that is going to help engage and educate people.
Yeah.
We also have, for further down the funnel, our lead gen forms and our document ads, which can be a really good way of delivering more long form information to your target audiences. And I think if you're combining all of those different types of formats, that's when you're generally probably going to see the best type of results.
Yeah, we've seen it, haven't we? Particularly with things like document ads in technical markets, where you've got to educate them, the audience, if you like, in particular aspects. I think we've seen that have really strong impact.
Yeah, I think document ads might be at least from the clients that we work with, probably the best performing like ad format. And since they've we A/B tested them across multiple clients versus the regular lead gen form, and I think they almost all of the time have outperformed it. I think it's that aspect of you're effectively giving someone gated content with a little bit of a teaser, and I think because that means it's a softer approach, you can give someone a white paper or a case study or something that is of interest to them. And bring them in, and it also makes you an authority on the subject. So I think document ads have been sort of really, really strong this year, and I imagine will continue to be that. I think going back to the full funnel piece and designing content across it, I think the key thing and what we try and do with our clients is make sure that there's a strategy that sits behind it. I think don't just produce get an image and put out an ad. Think about how you're doing it. Think about who you're reaching. If we're using the tender cycle example, if we're early stage tender, it doesn't need to be very action orientated or driven. It's just useful information for that user, useful information for the industry, for that sector. It's about giving people something so that they're aware of it. And then testing. As you say, A/B test everything. But if you design your content with that in mind and then start testing which format works best or which ads, or is it thought leadership, is it a case study, what's getting the best response, you'll end up with a much stronger campaign overall.
I think going back to that point that you just made as well around document ads, but I think it's more the theme of giving people an idea, of giving people some information and not always expecting straight off of the bat to get their contact details and their data from them. People in today's world that we live in are more protective of their data than ever before, right? So if you can give someone some really helpful insight into how you as a brand can help them before you're asking for their data and their information, you're far more likely to then, I think, get it down the line when you do ask for it.
Yeah, I think it's about almost mapping out across that journey what value you can add at each stage, and how you're going to add that value. And I think if you get into that mindset, you'll start to spot some pretty obvious gaps. I think, again, where we audit a lot of accounts, James, I think it's fair to say people will often have that bottom of the funnel bit sort of boxed off. You know, they'll be so heavy at that stage. But I think if you got into the mindset of how do you add value throughout that lifetime of a customer, like, or a buying journey, or, you know, just generally in terms of an in-market audience, I think it would be starting to be really quite interesting.
Yeah.
So the next thing we wanted to speak about was, you know, we've just talked about it there, Rachel, in terms of the data that's available, where it sits, how it sits, etc., that you can get, and that's really given LinkedIn a massive competitive advantage from a audience engagement perspective. I think one of the things that we wanted to really touch on was how do we use that data and insight for best practice? Because I think, again, this for me is a massive untapped element of what we see a lot on LinkedIn, is people not utilizing the data that they actually have within their business, within the platform itself.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to emphasize that when we think about our data, and this is taking a step back, actually.
Yeah.
I think, and it goes back to your point that you were making earlier. Think about your audiences as people that are in market and that are not yet in market and they're out of market, and they are your future buyers, right? So, and that's going to make up generally about 95% of your target audience is going to be out of market. So map out those audiences and leverage the data and the insight to make sure that you're including those people that are out of market, so that you're sowing the seeds, going back to what we were talking about, so you're sowing the seeds for when they then are in market, they think of you, right?
Yeah.
And you have to align your approach to targeting to ensure that you are casting the net as wide as you possibly can. So there are a number of different ways in terms of how you can leverage data of audiences that are available on LinkedIn. But I think before we get into that, also bear in mind, the slide that's on the screen at the moment, is that people that are out of market are the people that will put themselves into market.
Yeah.
You don't do that by delivering them content that you think is going to put them in market. You're not going to convince them to spend millions or hundreds of thousands of pounds on purchasing something if
you're not going to
out of the blue.
You're not going to adjust somebody's procurement process, are you, by the fact that you've done some great marketing. The reality is, but what you can do is you can make yourself available to them and make sure that you're getting the eyeballs before you get to that point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and then when you are at that point, really think about who those people are that you should be reaching and why you should be reaching them and when you should be reaching them. And you can look at, for example, your company page followers to do that. And you can look at the data across your website as to who makes up the people that are coming to your landing page. Understand, like, make sure that you are ready to and you understand your audiences and who you should be engaging with really, really well, because that will set you up and give you such a good foundation for success if you understand those audiences.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's a way to not waste money, because I think people can often try and find that on LinkedIn. You know, the reality is, if you want to just go and try and find where that data sits and you try and just spend across the platform and see what converts, is one way to do it. But actually, utilizing the data that's available will get you there much quicker and give you probably a better result.
Yeah, and I think there's a real happy medium in terms of leveraging our data. And I think sometimes a lot of B2B companies find this quite challenging because they think of LinkedIn and they think of the data that we have and want to go as niche as possible to target the really, really specific people that they want to be reaching. That is not what I'm suggesting you do.
No.
Because that is not setting yourself up for success. You want to find a happy medium whereby you're doing what you were just talking about, but also incorporating all of the different functions and all of the different people that will sit across the buying circle and the buying process
Yeah.
into how you map out your targeting strategy.
Yeah, because how many campaigns do you see where it'd be like, right, who's your audience? It'll be chief execs. And you'd be sat there going, actually, are they the people in their organization making the decision on that process? Answer, no. The reality is it's normally a cluster of people. It can be a more junior person. It could be a finance director. It might be an operations manager. But I think it's about really understanding who is part of that decision-making unit, and then understanding that it's not just about delivering to the most senior person possible.
Yeah, and this slide on the screen at the moment, we have found from internal data that we have run that 44% of working professionals generally change jobs in some way, shape or form every 4 years. So if you have got a long buying cycle that maybe is like 36 months long, potentially even longer than that, right?
Yeah.
They may be in a new job by the time it comes to actually some decision being made around a purchase.
Yeah.
So don't always discount people because they're not maybe at the right level of seniority or where you think that they should be right there and then. They might be there in a year or two's time when a purchase is being made. And the other thing I would say is that also make sure that you're thinking about people in roles that you might not necessarily associate with buying your products, because people that sit in finance, legal and procurement are intrinsic to how decisions are normally made, but they're very, very rarely included in targeting strategies.
Yeah. No, I think it is. I think it, again, it's a useful exercise, isn't it, to start to think about how a decision's made in your own organization, and then think about, right, how a decision's made, likely to be made in terms of what's the decision-making unit within organizations that you may be targeting as potential customers, etc.
And that it will vary as well.
Massively. The difference would be significant.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is on a conversion level, normally it's not one person that's ever going to make the decision by themselves then and there. It's very hard for an organization to just because you reach the CEO and they saw their ad and they may be invested in doing it, they're probably going to go away, have a conversation, and it might actually not be them making the inquiry. In fact, it's less likely to be them that make that final inquiry. So sometimes just because you're not seeing direct conversions from something, if you're thinking about demand gen, it might not necessarily mean that your ads aren't having any impact at all. I think, and particularly when we're talking about going after those bigger decision making units and including more influencers in that process, you want to be you want everybody in the room to be aware of you, to know who you are and what you do, so that when the one person that decides oh, I've seen their X company's solution to this problem, people are like, oh yeah, I think I've seen that brand somewhere. You've instantly got more buy-in, you've got more authority, you've got more trust there.
And I think just to add to that, the influencers are generally, we see the people that are going and downloading white papers, doing the actual research to then make recommendations internally about what decisions should be made, rather than it being the C-suite that are downloading a white paper.
Yeah, because again, it's about just getting that education, isn't it, and being informed and wanting to feel part of that decision-making process at any given stage. And
those influencers or people that are maybe slightly lower down within a seniority, they are wanting to prove themselves, right? And they're wanting to advance their own careers. So they want to make sure that they're doing the due diligence and the research to make themselves look good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the next thing then we wanted to move on, once you've got that audience insight and you're using some of the data that you've got to help inform some of that decision-making processes, is I think one of the famed aspects of LinkedIn is definitely the targeting capabilities, for all of the reasons that we've mentioned. But I guess, for me, one of the things that we wanted to talk about is how do you reach those sort of key buyer groups across the journey? So from that reach, engage, convert aspect. And I guess we just wanted to highlight that the availability in terms of the targeting capabilities that do exist within LinkedIn. Yeah,
I think we've alluded to it already. I mean, you're saying it you don't, just because your audience is very niche, you don't necessarily want to target as nichely as you can. LinkedIn does let you do that in most scenarios. You can make an audience that's 300 people big by targeting a single job title and then layering up like function or member skills, a level of experience or years of experience, etc. You can build a very, very targeted profile to hit exactly who you want, but there is not a huge amount. It's not as effective if you put so many limitations on the platform as if you go a little bit broader. There is a balance to it, and you probably have different campaigns for different jobs. You might have a retargeting campaign that's very, very narrow, whereas your reach and awareness campaign might be a lot broader. It might be industry and a couple of seniorities on top of it. LinkedIn gives you the flexibility to do that. You can pretty much everything that a user's put on their profile, you're able to use in your targeting network. And I think the key to building good audiences is planning a structure for it. So you start broadest at the top, and then you work your way down as you progress your ads through the decision-making journeys, and also make use of layers within that. Don't forget to layers and exclusions, I suppose, because the exclusions should come from you monitoring your campaigns actively, being like, actually, this website audience doesn't really seem to be engaging with that. So maybe I need to remove managers out of the job title targeting and just focus on directors, etc. Or maybe it's actually the targeting that I've set up. I've got an awful lot of people from a specific role that have a really low click-through rate and aren't really converting. Yeah. Maybe that's not the content for them. How do I exclude them to get to remove them? Or maybe it's using your first party data to auto apply exclusions and really make use of make the targeting as targeted as you can for the purpose that you're doing. So use all the facets that you've got access to it, but do it in a plan and do it over multiple campaigns. If you've only got the budget for one campaign, you are really limiting yourself. You do want to be at least looking at multiple campaigns where you can do those tests, where you can compare things, and where you can deliver different messages and different purposes with different objectives to sort of different audiences.
Yeah, I think when you look at this targeting as well, though, the capabilities that you can see on screen, I think this is where I think we're seeing more, aren't we, in the B2C space as well in terms of LinkedIn. You know, we were talking earlier about things like luxury goods and you know, we've got some luxury-based organizations that we work with that work very much in that like direct-to-consumer or B2C marketplaces, and they are very, very focused on LinkedIn because of that qualified audience piece.
Yeah. High net worth users, that sort of thing. It's like quite difficult to do on a lot of social platforms, particularly in this country. The US is less strict, but on a lot of things, I suppose. But yeah, so like we've had a number of clients actually where LinkedIn targeting allowing us to go after those sort of like high net worth individuals that might be hedge fund managers or CEOs in tech companies rising up, that sort of thing, and go after them with more consumer facing products. Because we know we can reach that audience, and that audience is there and they are engaging. And if we think about the sort of processes and the activity that we've discussed in terms of, it's not about putting someone into market, it's about making yourself available, making them aware of you. It doesn't necessarily matter that LinkedIn isn't a channel where you traditionally expect B2C activity to have a big focus.
Yes, and I would just emphasize that whilst LinkedIn is traditionally thought of as maybe a B2B platform for marketers, everybody who is on LinkedIn and has a LinkedIn profile is a consumer in their own right, right?
It's a human being. It's
exactly. Yeah. Yes, you might be there in your professional capacity, but that doesn't mean that you don't buy stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we do, and we're all, no matter where you are as well, if you're spending time consuming content somewhere, you are as likely to be pliable to or receptive to advertising on LinkedIn as you would be anywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a massive play to be had on that. And I think that, as I say, we're seeing some amazing results for clients if they can just shift the mindset a little that Meta is for this and LinkedIn is for that. If you actually just go, no, like, where can you engage with your audience? Like, is there an opportunity to engage with your audience? And again, that could be across multiple formats, whether we're talking TV, radio, etc. My view would be map all of that out and really understand where is your audience consuming, engaging with content. And I think this sort of on style, we start to talk about utilizing first party data. You alluded to it there, James, but there is clever ways, isn't there, that you've got to think about how you can best use that first party data to do some really targeted activity on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I think first party data, I mean, it's been one of the hot topics in the industry for the last couple of years in general, but the move towards it is so important because of things like AI, where everything is fueled by what you're inputting into it, and the better the quality of the data, the better the larger your conversion lists, the larger your contact list, company lists, etc. The more that you put in, the more that you'll inevitably get out. So some of the key things that you could be doing is company list targeting is always a good one. If you've got a tender cycle, it's like who your targeting is. So just have that as your top layer of audience targeting, and then you can mess around with the job titles and everything else underneath it. But you've got yourself, your businesses that you're going to target throughout all of your campaigns. Equally, if it's contact list stuff, it might become like it's sort of uploaded, and you can reach individuals, or you can layer them, or you can exclude them. That's the other thing. Don't forget to take out existing prospects, maybe from your first touch point or first awareness piece of messaging. Maybe you want them to receive something slightly different, so you can go at it from two different approaches there. And the other benefit of sort of that the first party data is it does, as I touched on it at the start, it fuels AI. But like, it used to be lookalikes that used to be the big thing, where you'd profile an audience and find similar people. Predictive audiences, which are pretty new, sort of replace that and sort of capitalize on similar sort of features, as in you give it a list of people, or you create an audience for it to profile and find similar like-minded users who are based on more than just their demographic traits, but also their interactions and their buyer journeys, which means you can again expand your targeting beyond that little niche that we were talking about earlier.
But I think as well, I know we've talked about it loads of times, but this is where quality of data and the sharing of information across a business is so important. Like, how many times do we think about we target people via whatever platform or whatever channel you select, and then what happens is they convert, and at the point of conversion, that then is handled over, or an inquiry comes in, shall we say, and at the point of that, it's handed over to the sales team, if you like, or a business development team, or somebody else in the organization. I'd always encourage people to look at what that feedback loop looks like, because I think that's one of the elements we often see some clients of ours struggle with is because we're operating in silos and compartmentalized. It's then like, no, but what was the quality of the lead, and did that lead go on to do it? Because as we've alluded to, we've actually directly said, not alluded to, it's the quality of information that you put into the platform that then helps you refine sort of your audience. If you've got a predictive audience, the more information that you can give the platform, the better then it's going to be much more refined as you go through. And I think, again, it's would be a plea for any sort of sales professionals out there that if you're working with your marketing team, etc., do make sure we've got a loop for how we feed that back in, because it's massive.
But I think that also goes for, like, from the outset, aligning with your sales teams, right?
Yeah.
So that you know that you're working towards a shared outcome, and that you are aligned with one another. It's so important for when you're then, as marketers, also going back to the business and being able to effectively communicate the impact and the ROI that you've had. That alignment will serve you well throughout the whole process. So, and I would agree with you. I think it's one of the biggest challenges that a lot of B2B companies face, is misalignment between sales and marketing teams and operation in silos. But making sure that you try to align that and fix that as much as possible will serve you so well for the future.
Yeah, I think when we talked about company contact lists and things like that, when we've seen it work really well is actually when, for example, sales team or people who have lots of interactions with customers actually feed into that process from the outset, looking at, right, who are the people we actually engage with when we're utilizing this, or what's the level of people that we engage with? What type of companies do we touch base with? When we go to events or trade shows, who are we speaking with at those events, and pulling that information, and again, helping. Going back to the right at the beginning of the funnel, it's like, how do you give people that information so that you're making sure that you are being as inclusive as you possibly can be? Because I think that makes a massive difference, that you're not missing people in the process by building it on assumptions, when you could actually just go and speak to a colleague who might be able to just tell you the answer.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the feedback point as well. It's like, make sure that feedback, it doesn't have to be like conversion API, which we'll touch on later, but like direct input into the platform. It can just be contextual, like, actually these job roles, we've had a bunch of leads from that, these haven't really worked, or every time I'm talking to this sort of person, they're talking about this thing in the industry. Those are the sorts of little nuggets of information you can get from your sales teams or your teams that are maybe even on the ground, like working with clients, that will fuel your content because they have the insight to know what those sorts of people are.
You've given me
interested
the
in.
perfect bridge into our next topic, where we're going to talk about all things creative and content, because I think it is so important, isn't it, that, as you say, you do take all of those like insights from as many places as you can to think about, right, what sort of content could we create, and again, where does that need to sit? So I think, the reality is, as you can see on screen now, you can do a full customer journey just within LinkedIn, whether it's taking you from sort of a watch right through a conversion, through things like lead gen forms that we see in platform. You can do all of that within LinkedIn. But actually, I think there is that visual hierarchy that we see, isn't there, around there's still best practice and still guidelines that people should engage with and take the learnings from what does really work. Yes, I'm all for testing and learning, but like, again, you can cut your learning time down quite significantly by following starting with best practice principles from the outset.
Yeah. And I think that you cannot ignore the importance of visual imagery when you are thinking about how to map out your content journey and your messaging. It's whether it's video or static imagery, it is the main element that people engage with and look at first, like straight off of the bat.
Yeah, isn't it like 50% cited as plus 50% cited as being the most impactful aspect of an ad? Isn't it something along those
60 different? I think different platforms have different stats.
I was going to say,
I think it does vary depending on the platform, but it's about 60%. I think is the sort of common theme. It's certainly above 50. The visual impact is the most important part of any ad creative on any platform.
It's the thing that gives you cut through, right?
Yeah, it's where you can show your creativity as a brand.
Yeah,
and you can play around and show your like unique approach to communication and to trying to engage people, rather than defaulting to using like stock imagery or pictures of people staring off into the distance. Avoid doing that. Like, try to think creatively about how you want to engage people.
Yeah.
And I think whether it's B2B or B2C, going back to the previous conversation that we were having, or we touched on, around everyone on the platform being human.
Yeah.
Doesn't, like, people still like maybe want to laugh. They still want to read or see some kind of creative image that might like generate a sense of kind of like humor within them.
Yeah.
So don't necessarily refrain from that if you are a B2B company advertising on the platform. From the slide that's up in front of me here, I think my favorite piece of content on there is the Accenture piece of content that has basically used video to try to mimic the fact that it has split into two posts.
Yeah.
And it's so simple and Yeah, actually really, really effective.
Yeah.
So you can be creative and innovative in a relatively simple way.
Yeah, I think one of the best examples we've got is we've got a container business that we work with, so self-storage containers, and they did a fantastic campaign, didn't they? Around they'd used machine learning, AI to basically say like, what would a bar look like for each of the beer brands that were out there? What would a Corona one look like? What would a Stella Artois one? And it got lots of people talking and really engaged with their content. And again, really got their personality across, and the engagement with that content for them was absolutely amazing. But again, it was because the creative really cut through on a platform where it can be quite straight laced, and you can have, very, very regulated LinkedIn activity.
Yeah.
They really were quite willing to put their personality and spin on it, and it really came through.
But it's an opportunity for, like, I like to think of it as being an opportunity for brands to demonstrate their personality, right?
Yeah.
It is the perfect opportunity for you to communicate as a brand why you're unique and what your personality is, what your brand ethos is. It's a great opportunity to do that. So don't shy away from it. And I think a lot of B2B companies in particular do shy away from doing that.
Yeah. It's about building that relationship, isn't it? And it's like, if you're building a relationship with somebody, you don't just want to know the polished version that we see on the surface. What you actually want to know is what they're engaging with more widely. And I say things like sense of humor, things like compassion, things like what are their views on societal issues and things like that, all add up to make a really clear picture. And when we start to talk about sort of that from a benefit ladder perspective, I think this is what we were talking about earlier, Rachel, really is too many sort of sit at that really functional level. And actually it's what's the added value? What can you get out there? What you're going to play into?
Lots of brands like to talk about themselves.
Yeah.
Like to talk about themselves, their products, what their products do and features, which is necessary, but to a degree, because you still need to make, first and foremost, that emotional connection with the people that you're trying to engage and trying to get on board to consider you to potentially then buy from you later down the line.
Yeah.
So hold back from doing that kind of stuff until you're like a lot further along that journey.
Yeah.
And think about the emotional and functional benefit side of things.
Yeah.
Put yourself in your audience's position. What will make their lives better? How can you make their life, how can you help them be more efficient?
Yeah.
How can you help them do their jobs more easily? And work back from there. Don't put your brand and your product as the center of it. Put your audience at the center of the content that you're putting out.
Yeah, I always think if you went to a networking event, you wouldn't walk up to people and just immediately start telling them about your business and what you sell and how you do it. You would actually try and build some sort of rapport with those individuals first. Yeah. And I think taking those human characteristics onto the platform is so important, because I think, again, we touched on it, lots of businesses actually just go straight into, we sell this and we offer this and this is where you can get it and we'll be super fast and efficient. And you're sat going, right, okay, but tell us something about yourselves first, like engage with the process.
I think one of also my bugbears and about when I talk about efficiency and fast and efficiency, don't say we'll help you be more efficient.
Yeah.
Like, that isn't adding value.
Yeah.
That's just saying, we will help you be more efficient.
Well, imagine saying...
Think about the how and the why. Like, imagine why we make people more
like,
efficient.
what would you ever say, we make you less efficient? I always used to wind me up with universities. I used to work in higher education, and no university says we're average for this. It's like, you're just not going to find that. We have an okay student experience. Our research is adequate. It's like, you've got to get through that, because we're not expecting people to go out there and say what you're average at all the time. But again, at least engage with like dialogue on that basis, or try and educate people about what you do and what you don't do.
Yeah. And I think that the content here in this slide particularly, like, really emphasizes the point of like ensuring that your content is helpful and relevant to your audiences their pain points and align around those kind of objectives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing to say is, you touched on it earlier, Rachel, video, like, again, don't do video for video's sake, but the reality is we do know sort of video, has taken leaps and bounds, strides forward in terms of, the way that people engage with video in whatever walk of life, whatever platform. We're engaging, YouTube's growth, for example, has been spurred on by people wanting to see more video content. And again, we can't get away from that, and we have to think about how we utilize video as a format type as part of what we're doing on LinkedIn, because we are seeing some amazing results, aren't we?
Yeah, video is probably our fastest growing format across the platform.
Yeah.
We are seeing a large amount of growth within the, I suppose, B2B influencer space, and people using video for that purpose as well.
Yeah.
It's the best way for you to be able to communicate effectively with your audiences and be able to articulate a lot of what we've been talking about, right? Around like helping them with their pain points and addressing the value that you have to offer. And video enables you to do that in a very creative way.
Yeah.
Whether it's through illustration or through or actually recording.
Yeah, I was going to say, because that's the thing for me. I think when people think video, they think advert, and you're sort of going, yeah, exactly. And it's the fact that video is very, very flexible now. There's long form content types that you can do, short form content types, different, vox pops, if you like, etc. Like, again, there's so many things that you can test and learn with. And I think that for me is the exciting thing, is the flexibility in video.
And animation in video as well can be a really, really unique way for you to be able to demonstrate a little bit of creativity and sit outside of the box.
Yeah. So that leads us nicely on the final point then around AI. And the reality is how we're going to see AI help shape what we do on LinkedIn, and where do we see the biggest value being added. So what we've put in here is a number of, I know we're going to talk about literally just a smattering of things that are happening. Some are already happening, some things are to come. We've held back some of the things that might be a bit further down in terms of the roadmap for LinkedIn. We'll talk about in future sessions. But for me, it's sort of optimizing towards B2B outcomes is a really important aspect of this.
So we've tried to split how we're talking about AI into 3 or 4 different ways that we want to deliver it to businesses. And the first off is around helping you build your brand. So going back to a lot of what we've talked about already today. And so we're currently thinking about how we can help you reach your audiences a certain number of times. So if we think about frequency, a certain number of times, so that you're going to have resonance and create that ad recall and mental availability. And then we're also thinking about how we can put that into creative ad rotation as well, to make sure that you're delivering your creatives via AI in a way that is going to generate the best results possible for the objective that you have set for that your campaigns.
It's about leaning into AI, isn't it, James? I think with a lot of this.
Yeah, I think the creative piece, like AI and ad rotation, it's why it's important to have multiple variants of your creatives in all your campaigns, so that the algorithm, the machine, has the ability to vary the content that's pushing forward, to try and identify what will work for that user at that individual time. I think all of the platforms, LinkedIn included, like within the goal setting, the objective setting, and the way that the automation makes use of AI and machine learning to improve based on the data that it's getting, based on the conversion data that it's data points that it's getting coming through, etc. They are extremely like there's 2 points to it, I suppose. The more data you put in, the better you get, but also trust the automation in a lot of cases is the other point. I think sometimes we frequently, like if you look at automated bidding, for example, rather than like the manual methods that we used to use before, those elements allow something like the machine learning to take advantage of more data signals than you're able to do as an individual. And sometimes, yes, there's not enough information, there's not enough data being fed back into it to align for these things, but like they tend to work. Like I go back, it's slightly tangential on the channel stuff, but if you go back to like smart bidding or like or Advantage Plus in Meta and all of their bidding modules where you let the AI do its work, it tends to give better results because it can analyze more data points and more buyer signals, behavioral signals than an individual can. So I think it would be trusting like the automation is I think is a very key point of making sure that you're effectively using it within your campaign setups.
Yeah, I think it's trust it, but make sure that you've got a framework there from which to test and learn and see the results that come from it.
Mm-hmm.
Predictive audiences, something that we're seeing massive success with right now, James.
Yeah. So predictive audiences, again, they are like lookalikes 2.0 is how I'd sort of describe them. The best way to utilize these effectively is to it's the source and the quality of the data that you're feeding in.
Yeah.
The challenge with making a conversion based or a lead based predictive audience is if you've got like 5 leads over a 3-month period, it's just not, the quality is not going to be there. It's about volume of data. Similarly, if you've got a 100-person like active client list, it's not necessarily going to give you the best audience there. So they're very effective when you've got enough initial data to build from. But that can sometimes be the challenge. And when you do have that challenge, think about what event or what data point do I have that I've got in more volume. So this is an e-commerce analogy, but like it works from a lead gen or a sales perspective as well. Like if you can't optimize to your purchase goal because there's not enough purchases, like you've got an add to cart goal, you might have webinar signups rather than conversions. You have other ways. You might have, it might just be website data. It might be
download.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's so much out there, isn't there, in terms of breaking down that journey and what we've said. It's not like everybody's in market all the time ready to be converted. So the reality is it's about then stripping back and saying, right, well, what are people going to want to engage with? And again, micro conversions almost, and be really clear on what micro conversions look like for you in your client's customer journey. Qualified lead optimization.
Yeah. So this one is definitely a what's coming in LinkedIn. It is available now, but I think the challenge is essentially it's conversion API to pass back your offline conversion events back to the platform so that the process of identifying what's a qualified lead is sort of automated for you. So it's one of those where like I think the technical, like from our side, we've seen a load of success on LinkedIn when we used in-platform lead gen forms and document ads, etc., to capture data. This would be a method where you need to reintegrate the offline events, which does require a little bit of dev resource initially. I mean, when Meta started this, it was an 80 the initial version of it wasn't as well adopted, but now it is much more effective and very effective. I think my key takeaway here is like you can connect those data sources if you've got the business resource to do it, but if you don't, still think about that lead funnels. Think about where am I going to get that? How can I give it some of that information, even if it's a bit more manual? Maybe it's not an offline conversion upload, but it's you looking at all of the qualified leads that you've got, or all the asset, or the sales qualified leads that you've got after a couple of stages, and being like, what are the similar traits? What are the trends in that? How do I use that information to fuel my campaigns if I can't automate the upload so the platform gets it in general. So yeah, I think making sure that you're optimizing you're using what you get after the initial lead to optimize your funnel further is an extremely important element. And I've no doubt in like 12 months or 18 months time, we'll all have Cappy on LinkedIn, just like we do on Meta and Google, etc.
And then finally, I think something that was really exciting, Rachel, is that buyer group targeting for all the reasons that we've highlighted earlier.
Yeah, so we have started to build out in platform what buyer group targeting can look like. And essentially it leverages the first party data that sits across your profiles on LinkedIn, but also our LinkedIn economic graph data as well, and also buyer intent signals. By looking at things like clicks and outreach activities to essentially help you reach all of those people that we were talking about, that might sit within a buying committee or within a buyer group, to help you reach all of those people to then hopefully at some point generate higher conversion rates and eventually more sales faster.
Yeah, so I think it's moving away from the idea of individuals rather than instead, if you like, focusing on that bigger group who might be part of that decision-making process, and again using machine learning to help us do the heavy lifting on that.
Yeah, and I think for me the exciting part about this is the intent signal aspect. And how we can hopefully leverage that within those buyer groups to make sure that we're able to deliver campaigns to the people that are most engaged.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this one. I think it'll be a really positive step forward for all sorts of brands that we work with. So yeah, really looking forward to that. So I guess in terms of key takeaways, we'd say sort of adopt always on full funnel solutions. Don't just be thinking about conversion. I think you've got to say understand your brand awareness and perception with target buyers. So again, linking into that, not just thinking about, right, somebody's going to be, won over by my ad at the point of conversion. The reality is you've got to sort of invest in building that brand piece alongside that. Reach and engage with buyers out of market. So again, LinkedIn with the same aspect. LinkedIn, do you like what I did there? LinkedIn with the same aspect is thinking about buyers who are out of market, but again, wider funnel, educating people as you go through, and also building that trust element. Rachel, we talked upon that earlier. It's like, you buy from people that you trust. It's the easiest thing in the world to do is just focus on that conversion piece, but actually trust goes beyond that. Creative is absolutely key. I said 50%, you said 60%, so we're beyond 50%. I think we're in agreement. All the data suggests that creative and that content is going to be absolutely essential in everything that we do from a LinkedIn perspective, because it is the thing that allows you to achieve cut through. I think what you see, I think the most boring thing is where you see so much same old in the platform, and you just sat there thinking, what a waste of time, energy and effort, because it's not going to gain any engagement or eyeballs when there's so much exciting formats, types of assets that you can produce, etc. I think there's so much creativity that you can see within the platform. And I think the final one for me would be around definitely AI is here now, but it's here to stay. And actually, the expression I used earlier was lean into sort of machine learning and AI, because the benefits that you're going to see as a result of that, we're seeing things already around predictive audiences having massive impact. I think
especially from an efficiency perspective. I think, to your point, let it help you where it can, and you add your expertise.
And I think then going back into buyer group targeting, that'll definitely help you in terms of effectiveness. If we get that right, I think you can then start to say, right, well, how do you actually make it more effective? Not just more efficient, but actually more effective in terms of engaging with that wider group. So I think it's really, really exciting. Again, final takeaway action would be, if you want to speak to us further on this, then we will be sending out follow-up emails to everybody who's registered or participated in today's session. But thank you very much, James. Thank you very much, Rachel, for joining us. Hopefully, we'll see you again at a future session. I've pushed as many people as I can towards do follow up with us in due course. And again, I'm sure we'll be back for another masterclass from MediaWorks in the near future. So look out for that on our socials. But thank you very much for your participation. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.